and local governments, what then should be our narrative. And essentially we try to align with what the President has, and it's up first most is empowering people, especially young people. We've heard today here how population can be a challenge, but if we can turn that into our asset, then we really are talking about great potentials being realized in the near future. So therefore our young people, not tomorrow, but today, empowering everyone through the jobs that we create. The second being about climate change, and we heard from our speakers earlier that that's something that's very real, and I know there are skeptics among us, but I think that we've witnessed it in Nigeria from the north with desertification and the drying up of Chad. We've also witnessed it from the south and the coastal erosion and the rising sea levels, but also from the incidence of climate change and flooding. So it very much is real. Fortunately for us, the world has come together to say we need to do something about it. I would perhaps say that there's still much more to be done. Those that are really emitting in our world today, warming it, are perhaps the least likely to do something about it, and that those that have the responses to make to it some way to go. And then last but not least, we were talking about it in protecting our environment, and I think that we know that we have to have that symbiotic relationship with the environment. We don't take care of it, then certainly we and our people, particularly the poor, will suffer most from it. From the environment, I think it's worthwhile talking about 3 or 4 issues that for us will be a focus on how we will address what we see are key challenges in Nigeria. The first being the policy and the regulatory environment. How do, in fact, we enforce some of the frameworks that we put in place to protect the environment, to protect from pollution, from the desertification that we see. Deforestation is a very big issue today. If we see how much logging is going on and how our regulatory frameworks and institutions are failing us because we're not able to hold them accountable, then we know that we need to pay a lot more attention to investments in things that are not so tangible. We talk about policies, we talk about frameworks, regulatory institutions, but we don't essentially invest in them because you can't really touch and feel them. It's not an attractive way to spend money. Yet it is the mortar for the bricks that we want to put together. So if we want to build, then we have to pay attention to that. Bearing that we have some time considerations. The other is, frankly, getting better coordination and coherence and collaboration for policy. Dictating it from the federal level and expecting to come down to Ogun State and see that a prescription is laid out where the context doesn't respond to it is not useful for the federal level, it's not useful for the state, and it's certainly not useful for local governments and where the majority of our people are. So getting a better handle around how we collaborate better on the environment with, for instance, agriculture, with the power sector, with solid minerals, with many key considerations. As I said, climate change is very real for us. Desertification is something that Nigeria's had an initiative within the AU, but we've been about planting a green wall, the Great Green Wall program that we have that says let's stop the desert. In this administration, what we want to do is to reclaim the desert. What we want to do is to make that green wall an economic opportunity for looking at how we address energy solutions, how we empower people and the entrepreneurs there, how we bring business into it. That trees are not just trees for shade, but they're economic trees, and that there are livelihoods that will come from them. So taking a different look at what we do with that. At the same time, on climate change, some of the issues that we have to speak to will be about growing that low-carbon economy. How do we emit less as we grow? Because if we don't put the preventive measures in today, they will certainly cost us more tomorrow. And so if you talk about industry, in my state, for instance, Gombe, we have a cement factory that is going to double in its capacity, perhaps, yet they're going to use coal. So yes, what are the alternatives to it? Who's going to pay for it? Can we go cleaner? Is there a transition to renewables that can make that possible? And we have to think very strategically about that now. But what can we also do about the energy mix? And my colleague will talk about that shortly. Fossil fuels, what's the transition? What are the options for us? When we talk about the population that has to be seen to today and not tomorrow, we can think about the longer term investments, but in the shorter term, that mix we have to think about, from solar power, from wind, from hydro. And then perhaps an easier one, and I know one of our speakers spoke to it earlier, Nigeria can end gas flaring, and what are we doing to make that real by 2020 and the targets that we've set for ourselves. So in terms of climate change, everything that I've spoken about leads to jobs, leads to us actually addressing some of the issues that will reduce emissions and protect the environment. We do have huge challenges in terms of protecting our environment today, from oil pollution to industrial pollution to sanitation, which is a big part of this. Today we hear about how we can address that with many solutions. Again, with the oil pollution for us, how do we, after years of a protracted issue in the Niger Delta, the Ogoniland oil spills, how do we come to terms with that? And the cleanup that will begin shortly in the next few weeks is a challenge for us, but is one that is possible. Perhaps what the bigger challenge is how you stay clean after the cleanup. And so the speak about the diversification of the economy is important for young people. What are the alternatives, perhaps, to breaking pipelines, to getting involved in a life where there is no hope? How do we make that real? And I think speaking to young people, skill sets that they need, and joining the economy will be incredibly important when we deal with oil pollution. The deforestation is a very big issue. Again, we've spoken about the health side of this for women in Nigeria who are having to use, the majority of poor women having to use firewood, and the implications on health. Yet we can have that transition to LPG. LPG will create more jobs. It will give a healthier life to women and to children. And so taking the opportunities from that to make that real. What will be clear, I mean, the result of all of this, we hope, will be the empowerment of people in the different ways that we articulate some of the programs that we have over the next 3 years. But I think one of the key issues that we will have to take up is partnerships. Partnerships within the sectors, and that's what we talk about, the multi-sector collaboration that strengthens us. But we also need to speak to the partnerships between the federal government and the state government. There are resources that are insufficient. But if we can agree a framework and how it is the sectors in Abuja that design their programs can reinforce the programs designed in Ogun State with the local governments, pulling in the same direction will make better use of the scarce resources that we have, more efficiency, and then we will get scale, because we won't be talking about federal pilot projects for a few Nigerians. We'll be talking about getting behind the Nigerians in every state in the country. So the partnerships with government at all tiers will be important. With the private sector will be key, but I think we need to redefine that partnership with the private sector. Embracing the private sector without considering the way in which we will turn around the core business concepts that you have, how you grow, your relationship with people, with the environment, and with those responsibilities is something we have to take on. And when we speak to waste to wealth and the programs we want to do, we want to start beginning to talk to the private sector, those that produce plastics. What's your obligation to trying to keep the environment clean, and how can you partner with government to make that happen, in making sure that not only do we take the waste away, but how do we create the jobs while we're doing that? Our international partners are incredibly important to us. I think today one of the biggest benefits of this conference has been listening to a president from Colombia. When we framed the SDGs and the Sustainable Development Agenda, it was Colombia that first coined the phrase, the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. But it was also Colombia that had the first framework that actually produced a focus on the working with their development around the Sustainable Development Agenda, but picking up 3 issues that were particularly important to them: the security issue, the inequality issue, and education. That was the thrust that the president then put, and I think this was a good example and helped us to get the framework that we got with the 17 goals. So sustainable development, keep them in mind, keep the goals as one that helps us, because they do talk about the partnerships and the role of the international community. Finally, let me just say that with respect to Ogun State and what we can do, there is a huge amount of partnering that we can, first of all, acknowledge that Ogun State is ahead of everyone else when they're integrating these 3 issues. It's not often that we see investments spoken about in this way. Often the environment is thought of as a side issue. It's not dead center, and I think you've shown here how that is possible and that we can't work without taking an integrated approach to sustainable development. His Excellency the Governor talked about the forests that you have here. It's an incredibly important part of carbon sequestration. It's important for us that we don't see the deforestation happening at the level at which it's happening. Not to say that we cannot better manage our forests, but we certainly shouldn't see them disappear, because that will be detrimental to both us and the economy. A cleaner and greener environment, we'd like to pick up partnerships with every state in the Federation, but I think in particular this is the state where the First Lady has shown the way in which to incorporate the environment in everything that we're doing. So in being clean and green is how do we put an end, for instance, to open defecation in every state by 2019. It's possible. We can partner with governments, we can partner with the private sector. It's something people take for granted in perhaps in other countries and the elite part of our nation, but the average Nigerian struggles with sanitation, and if we can find a way to deal with that over the next 3 years, we'll be laying foundations for a better and cleaner, healthier life. The other, as I said, is the waste to wealth. How can we partner with you on the recycling and to make sure that we don't have, by 2019, any of the plastic bags or the pure water or the bottles that are scattered around? And as my Minister of Water Resources colleague said earlier, how do we take the plastic bags away? Because as a herdsman himself, he's losing his cattle to the plastic that they eat and how they cause the death of many cattle as it goes. So let me just say that this is an incredible opportunity to integrate sustainable development, to see that the economy can be driven by making investments in environment, in climate change, ultimately in the lives of people, especially our young people and women. Thank you.